The pathway to spur population growth, abolishing tax to anarcho-capitalism. We will cover 4 separate topics on our journey to the pathway of population growth around the world. The economic imperative, how abolishing income tax could spur population growth in developing nations. 2, anarcho-capitalism, a pathway to demographic revival in developed economies. 3, exploring David Friedman's Anarcho-Capitalism, a vision of a stateless liberty. And finally, exploring Murray Rothbard's Anarcho-Capitalism, a radical synthesis of liberty and property. In an era marked by declining fertility rates across the developed world, the first world countries characterized by high-income economies, advanced infrastructure, and robust social welfare systems such as those in North America, Western Europe, Japan, and Australia, face a demographic crisis. Fertility rates in these nations have plummeted below the replacement level of 2.1 children per woman, with many hovering around 1.5 or lower, leading to aging populations, shrinking workforces, and strained public finances. This trend threatens the long-term economic stability as fewer young people enter the labor market to support growing numbers of retirees. While various factors contribute to low birth rates, including cultural shifts, women's increased workforce participation, and high living costs, one underexplored lever for reversal lies in fiscal policy, the abolition of income tax. By eliminating this tax, governments could dramatically increase disposable income for families, reduce the opportunity costs of child rearing, and create stronger economic incentives for parenthood, ultimately fostering higher population growth. In this video, we'll explore the mechanisms through which such a policy could operate, drawing on economic theory, empirical evidence from targeted tax relief programs, and projections of broader societal benefits. The burden of income tax on family formation and fertility decisions. Income tax represents a significant drag on household finances in developed countries, where progressive tax systems often extract 20 to 50% of earnings from the middle and upper income earners. This taxation reduces disposable income precisely when families need it most, during the prime childbearing years of 20 to 40, when individuals are establishing careers, buying homes, and considering children. Economic models of fertility, rooted in Gary Becker's framework of household production, treat children as both a good that provides utility and a costly investment requiring time and resources. Higher tax amplify these costs by diminishing the financial returns from labor, making the trade-off between work and family more acute. In high-income nations, where dual inter-households are the norm, income tax exacerbates the opportunity costs of parenthood, particularly for women. Time spent on childcare or maternity leave translates to foregone wages, compounded by tax liabilities on remaining income. Studies indicate that taxation can distort fertility decisions by reducing net income available for child-related expenses like education, housing, and healthcare. For instance, research on tax benefit policies in the United States from 1948 to 1997 found that tax exemptions for dependents positively influenced age-specific fertility rates, with escalates suggestions that 1% increase in effective tax relief could boost fertility among younger women 20 to 24 years old by a notable margin. This implies the converse. High taxes suppress birth rates by eroding the economic feasibility of larger families. Moreover, in countries with high tax burdens, such as those in Scandinavia or France, where effective tax rates on labor can exceed 40%, families face fertility penalty. Times series analysis from South Korea, a developed economy with one of the lowest fertility rates, around 0.8 children per woman, revealed that mid-1970 tax reforms increasing burdens contributed to long-term fertility declines by highlighting economic uncertainty and reducing disposable income. Abolishing income tax could reverse this dynamic, freeing up resources equivalent to 20 to 40% of gross earnings for families to allocate toward child rearing. This could lower the perceived cost of children, encouraging couples to have more than the current average of 1 to 2 offspring, thereby increasing population growth over generations. Empirical evidence from tax relief and pro-natal policies. While no developed country has fully abolished income tax, several have experimented with targeted exemptions or reductions tied to family size, providing proxies for the potential impacts of broader abolition. Hungary, facing a fertility rate of about 1.5, introduced lifelong income tax exemptions for women with 4 more children in 2019, later expanding to exemptions for mothers with 2 or 3 children. This policy, part of a broader pro-natal package allocating up to 5% of GDP to family incentives, has shown promising results. Fertility rates edged up slightly, with estimates suggesting 2 to 6% increase in birth attributable to tax breaks for additional children. By eliminating tax obligations based on family growth, Hungary effectively monetizes parenthood, allowing families to retain full earnings to cover child costs. Poland offers another compelling case where the government abolished income tax for families raising 2 or more children in 2025, aiming to reverse a fertility rate of 1.18. This zero tax policy is projected to add over $100 weekly to eligible households, pockets directly addressing economic barriers to larger families. Earlier indicators suggest it could incentivize repatriation of Poles abroad and boost domestic births, countering population shrinkage from 37 million today. Cross-national studies reinforce these findings. In OECD countries, cash benefits and tax incentives tied to children have been linked to fertility increases, with policies like child tax credits in the United States yielding up to 21% potential rise in birth rates if scaled aggressively. A meta-analysis of pro-natal policies in high-income nations, including Australia, Greece, and the UK, shows that allocating over 1.3 of GDP to family tax relief significantly raises the fertility probabilities, up to 79% chance of reversal in Japan if matched to Hungarian or French levels. These examples illustrate that partial tax abolition via exemptions works. Full abolition will amplify effects by applying universally, not just to large families, potentially lifting fertility towards replacement levels. Theoretical extensions from Keynesian economics further support this. John Maynard Keynes advocated family allowances to boost birth rates, noting that tax relief could counteract fertility declines by increasing family size through income effects. In modern contexts, abolishing income tax would create a fiscal externality benefit where parents internalize the societal value of children, future taxpayers, through retained earnings. Broader economic and societal benefits. Beyond direct fertility boosts, abolishing income tax could catalyze population growth through indirect channels. Increased disposable income would stimulate consumer spending on housing, education, and childcare, fostering economic expansions and job creation in family-oriented sectors. This aligns with demographic divided theory. A growing young population drives productivity and GDP growth as seen historically in post-war booms. Critically, this policy addresses the intergenerational imbalance in developed nations, with fertility below replacement. Systems like pensions and healthcare face insolvency. More children mean more future contributors. Projections of first-wave countries, e.g. Japan and Germany, indicate that without fertility rises, GDP per capita growth could slow by 0.4 to 0.8 annually by 2050, necessitating 50% of labor income redirected to retirees. Tax abolition could avert this by incentivizing births, expanding the tax base organically through population growth rather than higher rates. Counter-arguments merit consideration. Abolishing income tax would initially slash government revenues, potentially requiring spending cuts or alternative levies. e.g. consumption taxes. However, long-term gains that offset this, Hungarian policies, despite high costs, have stabilized population trends without economic collapse. Moreover, evidence from tax reform simulations show that incentive-driven fertility increases enhance labor supply and education outcomes, yielding net positive growth. Equity concerns that benefits favor the wealthy could be mitigated by progressive alternatives, but the universal nature ensures broad appeal. Conclusion: a bold path to demographic renewal. Abolishing income tax in the first world countries offers a transformative approach to reversing population decline by alleviating financial pressures, reducing opportunity costs, and aligning economic incentives with family growth. This policy could elevate fertility rates, sustain social systems, and invigorate economies. While inspired by successful partial implementations in Hungary and Poland, full abolition represents an untapped potential for comprehensive revival. As developed nations grapple with shrinking populations, embracing such fiscal innovation is not merely an option, but an imperative for future prosperity. Anarcho-Capitalism, a pathway to demographic revival in developed economies. In this landscape of first world nations, where fertility rates languish below replacement levels amid aging populations and economic strains, radical solutions warrant exploration. Building on the premise that fiscal burdens like income tax suppress family formation, a more profound shift toward anarcho-capitalism, a system advocating the complete abolition of the state in favor of voluntary, market-driven institutions, could catalyze even greater population growth. Anarcho-capitalism, as envisioned by thinkers like Murray Rothbard and David Friedman, posits that all services, from security to infrastructure, emerge through private competition, eliminating coercive taxation and regulation. This framework not only liberates economic resources, but fosters unprecedented prosperity, innovation, and individual liberty, directly addressing the high cost and opportunity barriers to childbearing in modern societies. By dismantling state monopolies, anarcho-capitalism can lower the expenses of housing, education, healthcare, and childbearing, while accelerating wealth creation to make larger families viable and desirable. In this video, I'll delve even further into the theoretical and empirical underpinnings of how such a system might reverse demographic decline, drawing on historical precedents, economic analysis, and the projection of societal transformation. The state as a fertility suppressant, how anarcho-capitalism liberates family resources. At its core, the modern state imposes a multifaceted burden on potential parents through taxation, regulation, and bureaucratic inefficiencies, inflating the costs of childbearing and diminishing incentives for reproduction. In developed economies, where women balance careers with family aspirations, these impositions exacerbate the fertility penalty, the economic trade-offs that deter additional children. Anarcho-capitalism eradicates this by replacing state coercion with voluntary exchanges, allowing markets to drive down costs across essential sectors. Consider housing, a primary barrier to family expansion in urbanized first world countries. State zoning laws, building codes, and subsidies distort markets, leading to artificially high prices that force couples to delay or forego children. In a stateless society, private property owners and competing developers will respond directly to demand, fostering innovative, affordable housing solutions without regulatory hurdles. Similarly, education and healthcare, often monopolized or heavily regulated by governments, consume disproportionate household budgets. Private competitive providers could reduce costs through efficiency and specialization, as seen in historical analogs where market-driven services outperform state alternatives. For instance, analysis of pre-industrial economies suggests that lower institutional burdens correlate with improved living standards, enabling population surges via higher birth rates and reduced mortality. Economic theory reinforces this. Julian Simon's seminal work argues that human ingenuity, unleashed by economic freedom, transfers potential scarcities into abundances, market population growth, a boon rather than a burden. In anarcho-capitalism, the absence of taxes, potentially freeing 30 to 50% of the income, combined with deregulated markets, would amplify disposable resources for families. This mirrors historical observations where prosperity for free enterprises correlated with demographic expansion. From 1960 to 2016, global population grew 145%, while per capita income rose 183%, driven by market innovations that lowered commodity prices and enhanced living conditions. By minimizing the opportunity costs of parenthood, such as the lost wages during childbearing, anarcho-capitalism could encourage higher fertility, particularly among high-income groups where current rates are suppressed by regulatory overhead. Moreover, immigration, a key driver of population in stagnant societies, would flourish under anarcho-capitalism's emphasis on private property and open borders negotiated voluntarily. Without state-imposed restrictions, labor markets could attract skilled workers, boosting economic vitality and creating a virtuous cycle of growth that supports larger native families to increase prosperity. Historical empirical evidence, stateless prosperity, and demographic gains. While pure anarcho-capitalism has not been implemented on a national scale, historical approximations provide compelling evidence of its potential. Medieval Iceland, 930 to 1262, often cited as proto-anarcho-capitalist society, operated without a centralized state, relying on private chieftains for law enforcement and dispute resolution through market mechanisms like fines and voluntary associations. During this period, Iceland's population expanded significantly from approximately 50,000 in 920 to 70,000 by 1100, a 2.33-fold increase, outpacing growth in state-governed contemporaries like France, 1.55-fold, and Germany, 1.23-fold. This growth stemmed from improved living standards, average human heights approximating for nutrition and health in Iceland ranged from 169 to 176.5 centimeters, comparable to or exceeding those in England, Norway, and Scotland, while real wages allowed for substantial purchases of essentials, often surpassing post-tax equivalents in tax societies like England. These metrics indicate that stateless governance fostered efficiency and wealth, enabling demographic expansion through lower death rates and higher birth rates, even in harsh environment. Contemporary analysis echo this. Simon's framework posits that economic freedom and rule of law, hallmarks of anarcho-capitalism, enhance human well-being more than population size alone, but when combined, they amplify benefits. More people generate more ideas, driving innovation that sustains growth. From 1830 to 2000, capitalism's spread coincided with a six-fold global population increase and a 8.5 markets-fold rise in per capita goods, refuting Malthusian fears and illustrating how freer markets accommodate and propel demographic booms. In first world contexts, where fertility dips due to high costs, anarcho-capitalist cost reductions through competitive childcare, education, and healthcare could reverse this trend. Historical economic thought notes that lowering child-rearing expenses encourages higher birth rates, as seen in progressive era debates where subsidies were viewed as fertility boosters. Anarcho-capitalism achieves this organically without state intervention by letting markets innovate solutions like affordable private schools or health cooperatives. Critics argue that prosperity inherently reduces fertility, as per demographic transition theory, where wealthier societies prioritize fewer, better invested children. Yet in anarcho-capitalism, extreme efficiency could make multiple children economically feasible without sacrificing quality, while cultural shifts toward liberty might valorize family as a personal choice. Slowing population growth harms productivity, as recent decisions highlight, underscoring the need for systems that harness human capital. Broader societal economic dividends. Anarcho-capitalism's demographic boost extends beyond births, yielding compounding benefits. Enhance innovation from a growing, freer population. Per Simon's ultimate resource thesis, would solve resource constraints, ensuring sustainability. A youthful workforce sustains pensions and healthcare without state Ponzi schemes, averting crises in aging societies like Japan and Germany. Economic dynamicism from competition will elevate GDP, with studies linking institutional freedom to superior environmental and human outcomes. Challenges, says that initial transitions from state dependency could be mitigated by voluntary communities phasing in private alternatives. Equity concerns that benefit occur unevenly are addressed by markets' tendency to democratize access through competition, as historical capitalism has done. In conclusion, embracing freedom for future generations, anarcho-capitalism offers a bold antidote to first-world demographic stagnation, liberating resources, slashing costs, and igniting innovation to make population growth not just sustainable but advantageous. From Iceland's historical flourishing to Simon's insights on human-driven abundance, evidence suggests that stateless markets could elevate fertility and vitality. As developed nations confront shrinking populations, this paradigm shift promises renewal through liberty, ensuring prosperity for generations to come. Exploring David Friedman's Anarcho-Capitalism, a vision of a stateless liberty. David Friedman, an American economist, physicist, leading legal scholar, and son of Nobel laureate Milton Friedman, stands as one of the foremost theorists of anarcho-capitalism. This political philosophy advocates for a society devoid of government, where all functions traditionally performed by the state, such as law enforcement, dispute resolution, and national defense, are handled through voluntary market mechanisms, private property rights, and free exchange. Friedman's ideas, most prominently articulated in his seminal 1973 book, The Machinery of Freedom, Guide to Radical Capitalism, with subsequent editions in 1989 and 2014, challenging the necessity of coercive institutions, proposing instead a framework where individual liberty and economic incentives drive social order. This exploration delves into Friedman's core concepts, the mechanism he envisions for stateless society, historical precedents, distinctions from other libertarian strains, potential challenges, and the broader implications of his thought. The foundations of Friedman's anarcho-capitalism. Friedman's anarcho-capitalism emerges from a utilitarian economic perspective, emphasizing efficiency, innovation, and individual choice over deontological absolutes like natural rights, though he acknowledges moral dimensions. He argues that government, as a monopoly on force, inherently leads to inefficiencies, corruption, and violations of liberty, such as through taxation, which he equates to theft, and regulation that stifles market solutions. Instead, he envisions a radical capitalism where private property and voluntary cooperation form the bedrock of society. This system, he posits, would not descend into chaos, but rather produce superior outcomes by harnessing market competition to provide goods and services, including those deemed public. Central to his thesis is the idea that humans can organize complex systems without central authority, much like markets allocate resources without a planner. Friedman draws on economic theory to demonstrate how incentives align behaviors. In stateless world, self-interest motivates efficient resolutions, as opposed to government's perversive incentives, where politicians prioritize special interests over public welfare. He illustrates this with analogies such as special interest politics resembling a game where pennies are redistributed inefficiently, leaving everyone poor but content with minor gains. Friedman contains that capitalism's track record, delivering better outcomes for the poor in private sectors like automobiles compared to state-provided education, proves market superiority. Key mechanisms in a stateless society. Friedman's blueprint for anarcho-capitalism revolves around privatizing core state functions, transforming them into market services. Number one, private rights enforcement and protection agencies. Individuals will subscribe to private protection firms akin to insurance companies, which enforce contracts and defend against aggression. If disputes arise between clients of different agencies, they would be resolved through prearranged arbitration to avoid costly conflicts. Over time, agencies will negotiate standard procedures, creating a polycentric legal system where law evolves as a product of human choice rather than legislative fiat. Friedman argues this would yield more just and efficient laws, as unpopular rules, e.g. drug prohibitions, would lose market share. Number two, law as a market commodity. In this system, laws are not imposed but chosen. Arbitration firms would compete to offer appealing legal codes, with market forces weeding out inefficient or oppressive ones. Friedman addresses concerns about the poor being disadvantaged by noting that economies of scale and mutual aid societies could provide affordable access, similar to how markets democratize goods. Number 3, handling public goods and externalities. Friedman tackles classic market failures like national defense and pollution. For defense, he suggests protection agencies could fund it collectively or through innovative mechanisms like assurance contracts where contributions are refunded if thresholds aren't met. He notes that post-Cold War threats have diminished, making private defense more feasible. For externalities such as environmental harm, he proposes a tort law and negotiation where effective parties sue or bargain, incentivizing polluters to minimize damage cost effectively. 4. Other applications. Friedman extends his ideas to immigration, unrestricted to boost prosperity, welfare replaced by private charity and mutual aid, and foreign policy non-interventionist to avoid wars. He criticizes the welfare state for redistributing from the poor to the middle class and argues drug prohibition violates freedom. Historical precedents and empirical support. To bolster his case, Friedman reinforces medieval Iceland, 930 to 1262, where a stateless society operated with private chieftains enforcing laws through voluntary associations and market-based fines. This system maintained order for centuries with population growth and relative prosperity, demonstrating that anarchy need not mean chaos. He also points to modern analogs like private arbitration in commercial disputes and security firms, suggesting a gradual evolution toward anarcho-capitalism through privatization trends such as vouchers for education or online commerce evading taxes. Distinction from other libertarian views, Friedman differentiates his anarcho-capitalism from minarchism, limited government for defense and courts, as in Ayn Rand's objectivism, by arguing that even minimal states expand and corrupt. He requires no philosophical overhaul of society, just 3 conditions for stability: solvable public goods issues, limited economies of scale and enforcement to prevent monopolies, and familiarity with private institutions via incremental change. Unlike Murray Rothbard's deontological anarcho-capitalism, grounded in natural rights, Friedman is a consequentialist, focusing on outcomes like efficiency. Challenges and criticisms. Critics argue anarcho-capitalism risks agency cartels, reinventing government, or unequal access for the vulnerable. Friedman counters this competition and consumer choice would prevent monopolies, and his historical examples show feasibility. Some view it as impractical as a theoretical pipe dream, but Friedman sees it as a benchmark for critiquing existing systems. He acknowledges no utopia is foolproof, but insists markets outperform states. Implications and legacy. Friedman's work inspires debates on libertarianism frontiers, influencing thinkers like Michael Malice and discussions on crypto-anarchism. By applying economic analysis to law and society, he pioneered law and economics, showing how policies derive from incentives rather than moral absolutes. In an era of growing distrust in institutions, his vision offers a provocative alternative, a society where freedom's machinery runs on voluntary gears, potentially yielding greater prosperity and justice. While not a roadmap for immediate revolution, it challenges us to question the state's indispensability and explore market-driven paths to human flourishing. Finally, exploring Murray Rothbard's Anarcho-Capitalism, a radical synthesis of liberty and property. Murray Rothbard, an influential American economist, historian, and political theorist, stands as a pivotal figure in the development of modern libertarianism, particularly its anarchist wing. Often hailed as the founder of anarcho-capitalism, a philosophy advocating the complete elimination of the state in favor of a society governed by voluntary market changes, private property rights, and non-aggression, Rothbard synthesized diverse intellectual traditions into a cohesive vision of radical individualism. His ideas expanded on seminal works like Man, Economy, and State, For a New Liberty, The Libertarian Manifesto, and The Ethics of Liberty, challenging the necessity of government, positing that all societal functions can be better handled through private enterprise. This exploration examines Rothbard's foundational principles, the operational mechanics of a stateless society, historical influences, and distinction from contemporaries like David Friedman, criticisms, and enduring legacy. The philosophical foundation, natural rights, and the non-aggression principle. Rothbard's anarcho-capitalism is rooted as a deontological framework, emphasizing absolute natural rights derived from self-ownership and homesteading. The Lockean idea that individuals acquire property by mixing their labor with unowned resources. Unlike utilitarian approaches that justify liberty based on outcomes, Rothbard grounds his philosophy in ethics. Aggression against persons or property is inherently immoral. This culminates in the non-aggression principle, the NAP, which prohibits the initiation of force, fraud, or coercion, serving as the ethical cornerstone for a stateless society. Influenced by his mentor Ludwig von Mises and the Austrian School of Economics, Rothbard critiqued state intervention as distortive to voluntary markets. He viewed government as a monopolistic aggressor, funded by coercive taxation, which he likened to theft, and perpetuating the inefficiencies through central planning. By the 1950s, Rothbard identified as a private property anarchist, evolving this into anarcho-capitalism by 1971 to distinguish his pro-market anarcho-capitalism from left-wing variants that rejected private property. He argued that true capitalism, defined as peaceful voluntary exchange, could only flourish without the state's collusive partnership with business elites, which he termed state capitalism. Rothbard's system extends ownership to absolute property rights, including the right to sell oneself into voluntary slavery, though he noted this might be unenforceable, and to discriminate freely on private property. He rejected intellectual property as a state-granted monopoly, favoring only physical property claims. This ethical absolutism posits that a just society emerges from individuals pursuing self-interest within NAP boundaries, without needing collective oversight. Operational mechanics, privatizing law, defense, and society. Rothbard's vision, the state dissolution, would see its functions replaced by competitive private entities, driven by market incentives for efficiency and justice. Protection and law enforcement would be provided by private defense agencies, PDAs, founded voluntarily by subscribers who enforce contracts and resolve disputes through arbitration. If conflicts arise between the agencies, they would negotiate or arbitrate to avoid costly wars, leading to polycentric legal system where laws evolve based on consumer preferences rather than top-down imposition. Courts and arbitration would be private, with reputations ensuring fairness. Inept or biased firms would lose clients. Rothbard addressed public goods like national defense by suggesting PDAs could coordinate against external threats, funded through insurance-like premiums. For externalities such as pollution, he advocated strict liability under tort law, allowing victims to sue aggressors based on property rights violations. Welfare and charity would rely on mutual aid societies and private philanthropy, which Rothbard believed outperformed state programs by avoiding moral hazards. He opposed fiat money, favoring a return to commodity-based currencies like gold, managed privately to prevent inflation. Immigration, initially supported as a right under open borders, saw Rothbard shift later in his life to restrictionism, citing welfare state burdens, a reversal criticized by his peers as inconsistent with his principles. Historical influences and intellectual lineage. Rothbard drew heavily from 19th century individualist anarchists like Spooner and Tucker, adopting their anti-state stance while rejecting their labor theory of value in favor of Austrian subjectivism. He repurposed Mises' praxeology, the study of human action, for anarchism, arguing that voluntary markets naturally coordinate society better than coercive institutions. Historical precedents, such as medieval Iceland's chieftain system, were invoked to demonstrate feasible stateless order. His early alliances with the old right and later with the paleoconservatives in the 1980s infused cultural conservatism, including anti-egalitarianism and populism, into his anarchism as paleo-libertarianism that sought to blend libertarian economics with traditional values. This phase, marked by association with figures like Pat Buchanan, emphasized strategy for achieving liberty through right-wing populism. Distinction from other anarcho-capitalist views. Rothbard's deontological approach contrasts with David Friedman's consequentialism, which evaluates institutions by efficiency rather than inherent rights. While both envision private agencies, Rothbard insists on a universal ethical laws, the NAP, as binding, whereas Friedman allows laws to vary as market products. Rothbard criticized minarchism, limited government, as unstable, prone to expansion, and viewed left anarchism as incompatible with property rights, dismissing it as socialistic. Challenges and criticism. Detractors argue Rothbard's system risks agency monopolies recreating states or exacerbating inequalities, with the poor unable to afford protection. Left anarchists view his anarcho-capitalism as oxymoronic, co-opting anarchism to mass hierarchy. His later paleoconservative alliance drew accusations of racism and inconsistency, particularly on immigration. Empirical feasibility remains untested, with critics labeling it a theoretical pipe dream. Rothbard countered that markets prevent monopolies through competition, and that voluntary systems foster mutual aid, outperforming states historically. Legacy, inspiring modern libertarians and beyond. Rothbard's influence endures through the Mises Institute, which he co-founded, promoting Austrian economics and anarcho-capitalism. Figures like Hans Hermann Hoppe extended his ideas, while his thought resonates in crypto communities valuing decentralized systems and in politicians like Javier Milei, who draws on Rothbardian anarcho-capitalism. Despite controversies, Rothbard's work remains a benchmark for radical liberty, challenging statism and inspiring debates on freedom's limits. Thank you for joining today's video, and we'll see you in the next video.